Hey, Hannah here, Customer Insights Researcher. This is Survey Teardown 2 of the 50 Surveys project. So 50 survey teardowns in 50 days, 50 marketing surveys. And the goal is really to just rediscover the art of asking better questions so that we can collect better, more actionable, more profitable customer data that we can funnel back into our courses and our products and our companies and our marketing and the whole gamut. Today we're going to look at a course that I've taken, I just finished recently, by Jack Butcher. It's called Build Once, Sell Twice. So we're going to kind of look at it from two lenses. One, my qualitative researcher hat, and then two, as an actual customer of the course. And so this is something like asking for feedback, following a course, following a mastermind, anything like that, is really, really useful, right? It can help you run through iterations, optimize each iteration, make sure you're actually building something that people want and use and respond to, and then are getting them the results so that you can use them more and more as case studies. And so asking for feedback in the way that Jack and Celia do here is great. What I want to run through are some kind of optimizing the way that we ask so that we can actually get insights that we can directly use. And we'll get into what that means and what that looks like over the next couple of slides. So let's start with the pros. First off, so this is the request that you land on, as it's almost like positioned as a lesson, which is great. When you position this as a lesson, it's like, oh, asking for feedback is part of the course. There's no way that I can, as a customer, miss this. You mark complete for each module, for each lesson, and then you go on to the next one, and then you land on this one. So it makes it top of mind for the customer, and also makes it feel like, oh, they really want my feedback. They want this to be like optimizing the product and the course from the lens of the customer. So it really makes the customer, myself, feel good and valued, and also that it puts this right in front of me. So I have the same kind of mind and intensity that I was going through the course with. I bring that same mindset to this particular module as well, which is great. The implication that we have here. So we'd love your suggestions on anything you'd like more clarity on. So this starts to touch on something really good, which is like it implies that the modules could be more clear. There might be areas that could be fleshed out a little bit more. And it is in acknowledging that and offering kind of room for like, hey, maybe there were some things that we missed or things that you wanted more of that you didn't see. By acknowledging that, or even kind of pointing to the potential of it, it invites more honest feedback, right? Because it sort of makes like negative or critical feedback the point. You're asking for like, hey, tell me the gap so I can make this even better. And so negative feedback becomes something that like, oh, I'm actually being helpful as a customer by giving critical feedback. So it makes it more of a conversation. It makes it easier to have some feedback that's quote unquote negative or more critical, which is then helpful for the course creator, right? For Jack and Celia, so that they can actually take that feedback and decide like how can they make it actionable and feed it back into improving the course. This next comment here, will continue to update this course with your feedback. So like huge incentive as a customer, right? I mean, not only am I going to be giving them feedback to improve the course, but then I'm going to reap the benefit. So it's sort of like, let's say I have a question like, hey, can you clear up this or add a bit more color to that part of a particular module? Chances are pretty high from the sounds of this that I can get those answers. I can actually get the clarity that I'm looking for. So it's kind of that win-win both ways. And when you're asking for feedback, you want to make sure that incentive to give feedback is really clear. Surveys and asking for feedback can often feel like work. And without a clear incentive, you find that folks that offer feedback will be kind of a small subset, right? You won't get a ton of responses. If you do, there are people who are like, oh, let me be your next case study. And that's great and not always the feedback that you're looking for. So having an incentive that's really clear and relevant to the customer will help more people who are on the fence give you feedback that can really, really leverage, and you can feed back into optimizing your product and improving your messaging and your targeting and all of that. And then this personalization piece, it just, with Jack here and Jack and Celia's name as well, while these might be parts of the platform, they just help make it feel like this is a person to person, right? Like I'm not just giving feedback to some bot that's like, oh, checkbox, the company asked you for feedback. Like, no, it seems like the semblance here is that this is a real conversation. These are real people, and they really want to know our experience with the course so that they can respond to it. So all of that is great. Let's take a look at some opportunities for tightening up this section with the goal of getting more actionable feedback. So if we take a look at this in particular, right, would love your suggestions on anything you'd like more clarity on. The trouble here is that like this is a super broad ask, and it can end up being tricky both for Jack and Celia and for the customer. So myself as a customer coming to this question, there were definitely some thoughts I had going through the course where I was like, oh, it'd be really, really cool to understand more about this particular module or how they went about that. But by the time I've gotten to the end of the course, I don't really remember where I had those questions and what those questions pertain to without going back. And that can feel kind of like a lot of work, and I might not want to do it, and it just forces me to rely on like what I can recall or not even answer to begin with, right? So it minimizes, it introduces a lot of friction because I have to then kind of scope back and be like, well, okay, where did I have those questions? Do I really, and then the dialogue that goes through my head as customer is like, do I really need to understand that? Because I'm now lazy, right? Like giving that feedback feels like extra work. And so the more specific that we can be on and the more closely we can butt the question right behind the aspect or the module of the product that we want to ask about, the better the feedback. And the more specific the question, the easier it's going to be for the customer to answer it. So chances are when we ask more specifically, because it's easier, we'll also get more responses and more robust feedback. We can get a much wider net and sample size. A broad question can be great to start with. And then when you get a sense of like, oh, a lot of people are asking about this module or that module, and then you can start to add in more specific questions so that you can keep strategically optimizing the product. And that covers a couple points here. Also, because I didn't know that asking for feedback would be such a prominent part of the course, which is fabulous. I love it. But again, I wasn't kind of making a mental note of like, oh, what areas would I want more clarity on as I was going through so that I could fill this out at the end. And this initial kind of title, it's always helpful to be slightly more specific when we have something where we're asking for feedback, and like keep emphasizing the value of giving feedback for the customer. So you might say something like ready to build your own product, or did we miss something? So there's a semblance there of like, oh, if they miss something, then there's someone there to kind of fill the gap. And it just increases the relevance and makes this section really relevant to the customer, so that, you know, they're more likely to respond and give you that feedback. You get more responses, you get more specific responses because the value of them responding is really, really clear. The last point here is that it wasn't really clear to me where to give the feedback. So I was clicking here like Jack and Celia a few times. When you scroll down, you see that there is a section with like Jack's his kind of avatar icon here, and a contact section or like a follow, and I clicked that and that sort of took me to a private message. And then when I scrolled down further, there were a few comments and a section where I could share my thoughts. So figured out finally that like, oh, okay, I can share some feedback here, but it's helpful to sort of give direction so that folks aren't hesitating, right? We're eliminating friction. Giving feedback can be sometimes like, unless you're really, really invested in the product, or it's something that you absolutely love or you really, really disliked, when you're in between, you tend not to be too fussed about giving feedback or not. And the more friction that you introduce in terms of like, well, what kind of feedback? This is a really broad ask, or where do I give feedback? The less likely an individual is to give feedback. So we really want to make it super, super easy and kind of be there that the moment we ask the question, we're there to collect that feedback right away. That might be a platform thing, but just something to keep in mind. There are cues that we can use in our language to be more directive and tell folks like, oh, scroll down to the bottom. That's where you can give your feedback. Leave a comment for your feedback. And so it just sort of eliminates the thinking. You get the focus purely on what feedback do I want to give, and any of the how and the logistics get entirely eliminated. All right, so a few recommendations that I would have to really see if the feedback that Jack and Celia can collect can be more directly tied to actions, like things that they can actually use to leverage. So often when we ask in more general terms, the feedback that we get could be like anything, right? It could be people saying like, hey, we should, this was great, this was so helpful, I'm going to try your course out, and feel free to track me and follow me. And you might get other folks asking specific questions, and they might be like general about modules, or they might be about pieces that aren't covered in the course. And it's a lot of work then the onus is on the course creators to parse through all of that, to find out like what's useful, what they can leverage. And then it becomes less likely that they will respond to it and kind of have it organized, right? So getting data is great. Organized data is what makes it actionable, and pulling out themes and really being strategic with how you collect data so that you can act on it. And so a lot of my recommendations flow around that, but we're going to talk first about the kind of intro here. This is, of course, like language that is templated, right? Like this is not language that I'm directly encouraging. You would massage it for your own tone, but want to focus more on the goal. So the first point here is to say like, hey, are you ready, or did we miss something? So what you're doing is like, it's a call to action. It's relevant to someone who's just finished the course in a way that's like right at the time when they might have questions. They've just finished the course, and they might be like, oh, this was so helpful. Or they might be like, oh, I thought there was going to be one more section on this. So it's like right at the cusp. I mean, it's perfect timing for kind of a next piece that they might be looking for after that last module. And so you want to really capitalize on that momentum here and show that like folks that might not have clicked onto the make a request or skipped past it might actually stop here and hesitate, because this is about serving me as the customer. And then a quick like acknowledgement of where they are at in the journey. And then we jump right into the ask. So it starts to get specific, not too broad yet. I mean, it's still broad, but we're starting to get specific on like what type of feedback we're looking for. And then we're also implying that maybe some of the feedback is negative. Like maybe this is not what you expected. And again, what that does is it makes room for negative critical feedback, which you actually want to keep optimizing and improving the product. Just some friendly commentary here, like a real person behind this, not a robot. And then, of course, that personal incentive to offer feedback, that like we are going to be updating the modules with your feedback. So reinforcing like whatever you tell us, it's not going to fall flat. And then expectation management. It shouldn't take you more than 30 seconds. So you want to be mindful there too of like, I'm making an ask and this is going to benefit both of us, but also like this is not going to be a huge time suck, right? It's going to be really, really easy and really helpful for the both of us. So the actual questions, I would have a section here right underneath that says, that sort of like syncs up that, okay, that's the end of that message, and now we're going to flow into the questions. You're just really repeating the incentive, encouraging negative feedback, letting them know like whatever we've missed, we're going to make sure we keep fleshing out the course with it. And then here are some kind of categories of questions. Again, the focus here is dependent on the goal. And from what we can tell about the goal is that they want to know what areas we might want more clarity on, what areas customers might want more clarity on. So kind of areas of improvement. So with that lens, the first question is something that you might toss if you have this data already, but it's really helpful to get a better sense of like who the customer is. Are they someone that's built and launched their own product before? Are they someone that has never done this before? And what this can help you do is figure out like the language that you want to use better to speak to them, either in the course, but also more particularly in your marketing and marketing messaging. So this is kind of broad. It would depend on what Jack and Celia already know about their target customer, but it's a really easy opportunity to get a sense of like who's who. And then the more specific that you can be beyond kind of entrepreneurs or freelancers, the sharper your messaging, the more likely you can, stand out and really kind of keep refining what resonates with that crowd. And then when we look for actual course feedback, we want to always do the duality. So asking what's most useful and then asking what needs work. So this kind of asking what's most useful might be replaced with helpful, might be replaced with like what was their favorite, what did they find most actionable. So it really depends on what it is that you're looking for. I would make this question a multiple choice, so as a customer I don't have to go back and refer to all the modules, and I don't have to recall that information on my own. It's like right there and I can just sort of click through it. Have, maybe you're asking for the top 2 or the top 3. It's really going to depend on what it is that information that you want. And maybe you don't actually want to know what their best ones are. The value of knowing what their favorite or their best ones are is if you find a theme, that can start to give you a sense of like, what are people really focusing on? What's drawing their attention? Are there similarities between these modules that make them stand out? So it does give you bits of information that you can work and dive deeper into. And then you want to do the opposite. So which modules they want more information on or to better understand. Again, multiple choice, just to really minimize the friction of answering and them having to remember and to recall. And the goal here is just to get like an immediate sense of like which modules kind of fell flat or didn't do as well as the others. You might find some themes here, which is really helpful for you in optimizing the course, and maybe even ideas for future courses and kind of tangents that you can, and other product lines that you can build out. And then you want to have a follow-up. So you'll see this is 3A here. So asking about like, what specifically is it that they want more of? And none of these are written questions here because it's really going to depend on the goal. The way you phrase it, the language that you want to use is going to depend on the specifics. But this is just sort of that skeleton of like, how to approach this section. So you want to ask about specifics, what was missing. It's good to ask in a general way, sure, but you always want to make it easy again. So might insert things like, did you want more real life examples, more step-by-steps? Did you want more how-tos, more videos, more text, more pictures? Like you're going to start to get a better understanding of what people are resonating with. And then that's going to help you be really, really clear and focused in terms of what and how you might optimize that particular module. And then end with an open-ended question about additional feedback. What this does is it's kind of a catch-all. So what you've done over the course of this is started to ask people specific things that by the time they get to this question, they might remember something about an earlier part of the course that they had forgotten or weren't really thinking of when they were on like question 2. But by the time they get to question 4, now it's top of mind. And instead of them having to go back, you have a question that can kind of catch all and help them really sink their teeth and share something that's top of mind now that would actually be really useful. And it becomes a space where it's like, maybe I didn't ask all the right questions in the survey. If there are other pieces of feedback that you want to give, we have a place to capture those here. And then when you start to get more understanding from what's most useful or which modules want more work, you can start to be even more specific. You can ask about particular modules. When you've optimized a module, you can ask about the improvements or the updates to that module. If you're getting open-ended feedback that talks about a particular module or a particular part of the course, you can ask something specific about that now in one of the questions. So this is really room to start with these multiple choice and with the open-ended as a kind of starting point, and then really keep optimizing your collection of feedback. And again, the value of this is it's going to make implementing and acting on that feedback, understanding it, sorting it, responding to it way, way easier because you've been strategic about how you collect it. You're not leaving the strategy and kind of the grouping of the data after the fact when people might write like giant paragraphs and you have to kind of sift through and find similarities and themes across multiple bits of feedback, which is a lot more work, and it might not be directed or specific to what you were looking for in the first place. All right, so that's it. I hope that's helpful. If you are collecting feedback for a course, great. See if you can be more strategic. The more work you put up front and kind of front load that process, the easier it's going to be, the more actionable the data is going to be that you collect on the back end, and then you can keep funneling that, optimizing that process as you go into optimizing the feedback you collect and the product that you're developing. Thank you, Jack and Celia. Awesome course. Absolutely love it. And thanks everyone else. I will see you back here tomorrow for survey teardown number 3.